Hi, my name is Nick Antonello, and today I want to take a look at some topics in governmental accounting. More specifically, I want to take a look at how to read governmental financial statements, as this is a little bit tricky for a lot of people because a lot of people don't get exposed to this, and it's a little bit different than, say, your normal for-profit type financial statements. There's a lot of different terms that are used, a lot of different ways of preparing them, different methods, things like that. And then after that, I want to take a look at some areas that are, potentially weak, some areas that there could be some misstatement, whether that be through an error or a fraud. And I want to start with how you would be classified as a governmental entity. The biggest thing is that you would have to have an elected body. This is not like a for-profit business where you just start a business. You don't just start a government. You're elected by a group of people who you represent, and with that, you also have the power to to tax, to issue debt. Taxes are like the biggest form of revenue for a government. So, that's something that you need to be able to do in order to qualify as a government. Once it actually does meet that qualification of being a governmental entity, and those are just a couple examples, there's a couple other ways that you could get there, but you are going to prepare your financial statements a little bit different, like I mentioned before. The biggest difference comes in the motive for the government. Whereas in business accounting, you have a profit motive, you're trying to accumulate as much wealth as possible. In governmental entities, you're really not going in with that mindset of a profit motive. You're more accountability and using the funds that you're receiving in a manner that is beneficial to the people that are giving it to you. You have a sort of a fiduciary duty to the people that are giving you the taxes that you're using. The point of the governmental accounting is to show, what are we doing with this money that people are giving us? And that's kind of weird for some people because you're used to the business type financial statements where we're really focused on a profit and we're focused on how do we make the most money and what are our risks and things like that under FASB. But under this type of governmental entity, we're looking under GASB. And just because you have an understanding of FASB and how to read the financial statements, that's going to help, but that doesn't mean that it's going to translate completely over to understanding a governmental financial statement. The biggest thing that needs to be understood when you're looking at a government set of financial statements is that they are using funds. The way that I had learned this was that funds are kind of like checkbooks. You have a bunch of different funds set up for different, purposes. You have like your governmental funds, your enterprise funds, you have your fiduciary funds, you have those kind of things. And I'm not going to get too into what those are. That's for a different video. But it's important to note that that's how they're accounting for things. Different funds have different ways of accounting. Your governmental has like your modified accrual. Your enterprise and your internal service funds may have like a normal accrual, but that's like the biggest difference, and it's kind of hard conceptually for a lot of people. Within this, you also have a reconciliation of all these funds to one giant government-wide financial statements that uses the accrual system. Having a strong understanding of how to read financial statements it's important. It's a lot more important than people probably get credit for. Think about it. When you read financial statements for a company, that's a skill. That's something that companies look for and people want when they're trying to hire people. Government's kind of the same way. Obviously, it's a little bit different in that the way that you're reading them and the things that you're doing with that information is different, but it's still a skill. It's important to know. It's a lot more important than people think. Think about it this way. You understand how to read a company's financial statements. You understand how to read, where they're getting their money from, what risks they have, things like that. Don't you think it'd be kind of beneficial to have the same understanding of the financials of an entity that you are literally giving money to? They're taking money by way of taxes, and they're in theory using it to help you. That seems to me like a beneficial thing to understand how to read. And when we're looking at these financial statements, we're doing exactly that. We're trying to see the financial health of the government and where possible risks are, which is not unlike a business type financial statement at all. Also, not unlike a business type financial statement is that these governments do have revenues and expenses, but the difference is that we're not netting the two against each other in order to find a net income or loss. We're looking at, how did this company use the revenues that they gained? Did they use it effectively? And the difference between the two is going to give us a surplus or a deficit. And surplus or deficit is not necessarily, good or bad depending on how you look at it. If you have a surplus, that in your mind you're probably thinking, that's a good thing. But if you have a huge surplus, my first thought as a taxpayer is, why did you tax me so much? Why didn't you use this money? Is it bad budgeting? Is it, just not using the funds that you're giving me? Why are my taxes so high? I would want a lower tax. And then the opposite is true for a deficit. If I have a close deficit, I'm okay with that. That means that my government used my money, they didn't overtax, they did a good job. But if my deficit is huge, why is it so big? Did they, not take enough in taxes? Should it have been more? Are they overspending? Things like that. So, having that understanding is really important in order to, really get a sense of how your government's doing and what they're doing with the money that you're giving them. And being able to read and understand these financial statements is important. It's as important, if not more so, as being able to understand and read the financial statements of a public company. The difference is this is your money. This is money that you remitted to the government, and now we're trying to figure out what did they do with that money. And from here, the biggest single source of information regarding the financial statements of a government is going to be the CAFR, the Comprehensive Annual Financial Report. And this is not unlike a 10K at all. It's essentially the government's version of a 10K. These CAFRs are full of information, and it's important to know, really what you want to look out for. Similar to a business, the best place to start is probably the management discussion and analysis, or the MD&A section. This is going to give you an idea of where the government thinks they're at and how they're performing currently. This is going to give you some qualitative and quantitative factors. Besides this, there are some notes. There's some supplementary information, a lot like a 10K. Where it really gets different is the financial statements themselves. So included in the CAFR are going to be all of the different funds that you have. The governmental funds, the fiduciary funds, the proprietary funds. They're all going to be in there. And then they're also going to have a big reconciliation of them all to a government-wide set of financial statements, which I mentioned earlier. A lot of people would probably go straight for the governmental-wide set of financial statements, as it's going to have the most, comprehensive information. But it could get a little messy and hard to read. So having the ability to read these, fund financial statements and see what they are doing is actually very important. The CAFR is, really rich with information, important information, and not a lot of people read them. And I think it is really important to do that and to understand what it is that you're reading. And finally, I want to take a look at some areas of weakness and where I personally believe that information could be the most susceptible to erroneous entering, or even potentially fraud at some point. I think the biggest single issue with governmental accounting is probably the budgeting process. Budgeting is sort of like the Wild West for accounting. It seems to me like it's kind of a free-for-all. There's really no regulation for it. There's no set way to do it. There's kind of like a generally accepted way of doing it, but that's not like set in stone. The fact that in theory the governments could just be, spitting out random numbers is kind of a scary thought. Not that they are, not that they would, but the fact that that's kind of allowed is a little bit of a scary thought. Budgeting seems like it could be a great way for someone that wanted to commit fraud to do so. If you think about it, like they could levy a huge tax, say that they were using it for, say, like a capital project or something like that, but they could show on the financial statements that that's what they did, but could just skim off the top or even take the whole thing, pocket it, and that's just kind of a weird thought to me. It's a little bit scary to think about. The biggest takeaway from all this, I think, is that you should have an understanding of how to read the governmental financial statements. You should know how the governmental entities that are taxing you and using those taxes operate. You should understand where your money's going. You should understand how these government officials are trying to better your life, because it's your money that's going into it, and you would want to see this being paid back in some form. Understanding CAFR is super important. It's just like looking at a 10K for a company that you want to invest in. But this is a little bit more skin in the game because it's your money that's being used in these CAFRs. The revenues are straight out of your pocket. I think it's about as important as financial literacy. And I think that if you had gone through accounting enough to get to a point where you're trying to learn about governmental accounting, you would understand the importance of financial literacy. It is still something of a niche market, governmental accounting, but I think it's becoming a little more popular. It's a bigger portion on like the CPA exam, so accountants are being more aware of it. I do think it has a ways to go until it's done really well. I think obviously there's still a lot of room for improvement for business type organizations, but I think most people aren't getting exposure to it, and that's the biggest issue. I think that it's something that needs to be taught more and exposed more to people when they are coming up through an accounting program. We do it in grad school, but that's pretty much it. I think more people should make an effort to understand it and to be conscious of it. But that's really all I have for this. I hope that you enjoyed it and maybe even learned something. Thank you for watching.